You've worked with this person. Maybe they took credit for your project. Maybe they thanked a colleague and smiled at the funeral. Maybe they got promoted, again, and you sat in the meeting asking yourself how. They charm upward. They bruise sideways. They vanish when there's blame to assign. And the system rewards them, not despite what they are, because of it. This episode is about why, not the surface answer, not some people are just manipulative. The deeper answer, the structural answer, the one that explains why one toxic person in a department of 30 can corrupt the entire floor and leave a stain that outlasts their time there by years. By the time we're done, you'll understand something that most dark psychology content never tells you. The real danger isn't the dark personality in the corner office. The real danger is what their presence does to everyone around them, including you. In 2002, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia named Delroy Paulhus coined a term that would reshape how we understand toxic behavior in organizations. He called it the dark triad. 3 overlapping personality constructs: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, each distinct, each destructive, each surprisingly common in professional environments. Here's how they show up at work, not in textbook language, but in the room you sit in every Monday morning. The narcissist is the one who speaks first in every meeting. They have a specific talent for making their ideas sound like consensus. They are captivating to people above them and draining to people beside them. They need the spotlight the way other people need oxygen, and they will quietly sabotage anyone who dims it. The Machiavellian is harder to see. They're patient, strategic. They cultivate relationships not for connection, but for leverage. They keep score of every favor, every slight, every vulnerability. When they move against you, it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like a confluence of unfortunate circumstances. That's the point. The psychopath is the cold one. Low empathy, high risk tolerance, and a surface charm that can be genuinely disarming. They don't particularly enjoy hurting people. They just don't mind it. And in competitive professional environments, where outcomes matter more than process, that indifference becomes a structural advantage. None of these 3 look like movie villains. They look like your manager, your skip level, the new hire who immediately became the CEO's favorite. And here's the uncomfortable part. Research suggests between 3 and 21% of corporate leaders score significantly higher on psychopathic traits than the general population, depending on the instrument used and the industry studied. 1 in 20, 1 in 5, somewhere in that range. Look around your next all-hands meeting. In 2012, a team of researchers led by Ernest O'Boyle at Longwood University published a meta-analysis in the Journal of Applied Psychology. That is, in my view, one of the most important and underread studies in all of organizational psychology. They analyzed 245 independent samples, nearly 44,000 workers across industries, roles, and countries. And they asked a simple question: what do dark triad traits actually predict in the workplace? The results were not subtle. Increases in Machiavellianism and psychopathy were consistently associated with reductions in job performance. Not just self-reported performance, measured output, supervisor ratings, objective metrics, and counterproductive work behavior, the technical term for things like theft, sabotage, deliberate inefficiency, harassment, and undermining colleagues, was significantly associated with increases in all 3 dark triad components. All 3. The effect was moderated by 2 factors: authority and culture. Meaning, dark triad individuals caused more damage when they had more power, and caused more damage in organizational cultures that permitted or rewarded their behavior. Read that again. The culture either constrains or amplifies the damage. This is the first crack in the conventional narrative. We tend to think about toxic people as individual problems requiring individual solutions. Identify them, manage them, remove them. The O'Boyle meta-analysis suggests the container matters as much as the contents. A psychopath in a rigidly ethical organization with strong accountability structures does less damage than a moderately Machiavellian manager in a culture that rewards political maneuvering. The personality is only half the equation. The other half is what the organization tells that personality is allowed. Now, you might be thinking, fine, but surely people with these traits do achieve real career success. Otherwise, why would organizations tolerate them? Fair question. In 2016, Daniel Spurk and colleagues published a study in Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, examining exactly this, the relationship between dark triad traits and actual career outcomes: salary, promotions, leadership attainment. Their findings complicated the successful psychopath myth considerably. Narcissism showed a positive correlation with some subjective career outcomes, satisfaction, perceived status. But the meta-analytic relationship between narcissism and leader effectiveness was, in their analysis, virtually zero across rating sources. Virtually zero. More precisely, performance was highest for leaders with moderate levels of narcissistic traits, not high, not low. The curve peaked in the middle and fell off at both extremes. The leaders who looked most dominant and self-assured were often the least effective when you measured actual team output. So why do they keep winning promotions? Because the people doing the promoting are often measuring the wrong thing. Confidence reads as competence. Boldness reads as vision. The charismatic presentation gets the room. The actual outcomes, turnover rates, team cohesion, long-term performance, get measured later by someone else in a different fiscal year. By then, the dark triad leader has already moved up. Here is what nobody talks about. And I want you to stay with this for a moment, because this is the part of the research that genuinely changed how I think about toxic workplaces. We spend enormous energy trying to identify the dark personality, the toxic coworker, the manipulative manager. We build our understanding around the individual, spot them, name them, protect yourself from them. But here is what the evidence actually shows when you look closer. The most dangerous thing a dark triad leader does is not what they do to you directly. It's what their presence does to everyone around them. Research on social modeling and ethical climate shows that low Machiavellianism individuals, people who are, by nature, cooperative and relatively honest, begin mirroring manipulative tactics when leadership signals that those tactics are acceptable. Normal people. Ethical people. People who would have behaved completely differently under different management. You don't need to be dark triad to act like it. You just need to work for one long enough. A 2021 study by De Hoog, Den Hartog, and Belshak in the Journal of Organizational Behavior examined 402 leader-follower dyads. Their finding was striking. Machiavellian leaders showed abusive supervision specifically when ethical constraints in the organization were weak, when rules were unclear, or when the culture signaled that instrumental self-serving behavior was normal. The abuse wasn't random. It was conditional. It switched on when the environment permitted it. And the downstream effects were measurable. Subordinates under those conditions showed reduced organizational citizenship behavior, the informal, voluntary behaviors that make teams actually function, and increased emotional exhaustion. Not just the direct targets of abuse, everyone in the system. This is the contagion model, and it is far more frightening than the individual pathology model. A single dark triad leader doesn't create a department of dark triad employees. They don't need to. They create a culture in which normal employees begin calculating rather than collaborating, withholding rather than sharing, protecting rather than contributing. The behavior spreads not because people become psychopaths, but because the environment makes psychopathic behavior locally rational. If your manager rewards political maneuvering and punishes honest dissent, the honest employees either adapt or leave. The ones who stay learn the rules. And 6 months later, they're doing things they never imagined doing. Not because they changed, because the culture told them this is how survival works here. That is not a character failure. That is a completely predictable response to a corrupted incentive system. And the people who designed that system? They may have moved on by the time you start playing by its rules. Let me give you a scenario that is uncomfortable because it is specific. Imagine you start a new job. You are collaborative by nature. You share information freely. You give credit. You raise concerns through proper channels. In month 2, you notice your manager takes ideas from team meetings and presents them upward as their own. You raise it quietly. Nothing changes. In month 4, a colleague who spoke up about a process problem gets quietly sidelined. Not fired, just removed from interesting projects. You watch it happen. In month 6, you're preparing for a performance review. And for the first time, you think carefully about which of your accomplishments to emphasize and which of your manager's mistakes to quietly not mention. You haven't become a Machiavellian, but you're doing Machiavellian math. That is the contagion. That is exactly what the research describes. Jennifer Chapman, the Paul J. Cortese Distinguished Professor at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, has spent decades studying how leader personality shapes organizational culture. In a landmark 2024 study published in Academy of Management Discoveries, co-authored with Stanford's Charles O'Reilly and Benjamin Dorr, Chapman's team ran 5 experiments with 1,162 participants, plus a field study of actual CEOs. Their finding was this: narcissistic leaders create organizational cultures that are measurably less collaborative and less ethical than those created by non-narcissistic leaders. But here's the part that made this study different from everything that came before it. The effect outlasted the leader's tenure. The cultures didn't recover when the narcissist left. The dysfunction persisted, encoded not just in people's behavior, but in institutionalized policies, promotion criteria, and informal norms that had been shaped to serve the leader's ego during their time in power. Charles O'Reilly, the Frankie Buck professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business, described the phenomenon this way: narcissists change organizations the way bad money drives out good. The dysfunction circulates through the system long after the original source is removed. Think about what that means practically. You join a company. The narcissistic founder left 3 years ago. But the compensation structure they built still rewards individual performance over team outcomes. The promotion process they designed still elevates people who are politically visible over people who are quietly excellent. The informal culture they created still treats vulnerability as weakness and collaboration as naive. You never met this person. You are living inside the architecture they built. Blickel and Schutta's 2017 study in personality and individual differences added another dimension to this picture. They found that different facets of psychopathy predict different types of workplace harm. Self-centered impulsivity, acting on immediate desires without considering consequences, predicted counterproductive work behavior broadly. But fearless dominance, the cold, confident, risk-taking component, predicted organizational harm specifically when it was combined with low education or low interpersonal influence. In other words, the psychopathic leader with social capital and credentials can channel the fearless dominance constructively enough to survive for years. The damage they cause is subtle, systemic, and hard to attribute. The pattern looks like a streak of bad luck, like difficult market conditions, like talent leaving for better opportunities. It rarely looks like one person. I want to say something here that I think is genuinely counterintuitive, and that most dark psychology content gets completely wrong. There is a dominant narrative in this space that dark triad individuals are secretly winning, that psychopaths thrive while their victims suffer, that Machiavellians accumulate power and comfort while the people they exploit pay the price. The research does not support this cleanly. The Spurk et al. Findings we discussed, that narcissistic leader effectiveness is virtually zero, are one piece of the picture. But there's another layer. Psychopathy at the individual level predicts stress, emotional exhaustion, burnout. The same fearless dominance and impulsivity that creates tactical advantage in competitive environments also creates a specific kind of internal instability, difficulty with sustained attention, impulsive decision-making under pressure, an inability to build the deep professional relationships that provide genuine career protection during difficult periods. The successful psychopath is often someone who looks dominant in a snapshot, but is quietly cycling through positions, burning bridges, and accumulating a pattern of departures that never quite coheres into a stable career. This doesn't mean they're suffering proportionally to the damage they cause. They're often not. And I don't want this to slide into reassurance. Don't worry. Karma gets them eventually is not the insight here. The insight is different. Understanding that dark triad individuals are not invulnerable, that their traits create genuine liabilities, not just weapons, matters because it changes how you read the room. The confident psychopath who seems untouchable is also someone who is accumulating risk. The narcissistic manager who appears to be rising is also someone who is, in Chapman's framing, institutionalizing a culture that will eventually limit the organization's ability to retain honest talent. They are not building something sustainable. They are consuming something finite. And organizations, good ones eventually, figure this out. The problem is the lag time. The research on dark triad burnout is consistent with a phenomenon clinical psychologists have observed for decades: the experience of sustained emotional suppression, of maintaining a false social presentation across every interaction, of calculating every relationship rather than genuinely engaging with it, is cognitively expensive in ways that compound over time. They may win the meeting. They may win the year. But the internal cost is real, even when it's invisible. Let me ask you something direct. Have you ever caught yourself doing something at work, withholding information, framing a message strategically, protecting your reputation in a conversation rather than just being honest, and felt a quiet discomfort about it? Not guilt exactly. More like a recognition that you don't quite recognize yourself in that moment. That discomfort is important. It's diagnostic. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It may mean you're operating inside a system that has been quietly calibrated to make that behavior locally rational. Here are the signs that you are working inside a dark triad corrupted culture, not just a difficult environment, but one that has been architecturally shaped by the contagion we've been describing. The first sign: credit and blame flow upward and downward asymmetrically. Successes get claimed by people with authority. Failures get attributed to people without it. And this is not an occasional aberration. It's the consistent pattern, and everyone knows it, and nobody says it out loud. The second sign: the most politically visible people get the opportunities, regardless of whether their outputs justify it. You've watched someone get promoted whose primary skill appears to be managing perception. You've watched someone excellent get sidelined because they were bad at being visible. The promotion criteria, in practice, reward the wrong things. The third sign: raising concerns, is a social risk. You've seen what happens to people who push back honestly, not dramatic retaliation, just quiet marginalization. Slowly removed from the interesting conversations. Less likely to get the stretch assignment. Never punished explicitly. Just not rewarded. And everyone who's been there long enough learned the lesson without being taught it. The fourth sign: there is a gap between the stated values and the operational ones. The organization says it values collaboration, transparency, psychological safety. What it actually rewards is individual performance, controlled information, and the appearance of confidence. You live in that gap every day. The fifth sign: you feel morally fatigued, not just tired, not just burned out. There's a specific texture to working in a compromised ethical climate, a kind of daily low-grade erosion of your own sense of integrity. You make small compromises, then slightly larger ones, and over time you can't quite remember where your actual line is anymore. If any of that landed, I want to be careful here. Because if you are recognizing your own workplace in this, that is not a casual realization. That is something worth taking seriously, not just as a professional problem, but as a personal one. And if setting a boundary in this environment could put you at risk, financially, professionally, physically, your safety comes first. Before any strategy in this video, here is the shift I want to offer. Most advice about toxic coworkers is individual-focused. Document everything, set limits, gray rock, disengage, exit. All of that can be genuinely useful, but it places the entire burden on you as an individual navigating a system-level problem. And it doesn't address the architectural damage we've been describing. So let me give you a different frame, one that operates at both levels. The individual level first, The most important thing you can do in a dark triad corrupted environment is rebuild your own signal clarity. The contagion works by gradually distorting your read on what's normal. You stop trusting your own discomfort because everyone around you seems to have adapted. You start treating your own ethical instincts as naivete rather than data. They are data. Your discomfort is telling you something real about the gap between stated and operational values. That signal is worth protecting. Document your own contributions, not for weaponization, but for clarity. In environments where credit flows asymmetrically, your own memory of what you built matters. It matters for your sense of self. It matters when you eventually need to represent your work elsewhere. Build horizontal relationships deliberately. The dark triad contagion isolates people laterally. It creates environments where colleagues distrust each other and compete for vertical favor. The antidote is genuine lateral trust. Find the people in the organization who still act with integrity. Invest in those relationships. They are both a professional resource and a psychological anchor. Now the structural level, because this is what most content ignores. Chapman and O'Reilly's research makes something clear that has significant practical implications. Dark triad leaders do their most lasting damage through institutional mechanisms. Hiring criteria, compensation structures, promotion processes, meeting norms, the explicit and implicit rules about what behavior gets rewarded. This means that if you ever have structural influence, if you are ever in a position to shape any of these mechanisms, even modestly, that is where the real work happens. Not in managing down individual toxic behavior, but in redesigning the systems that amplify it. An organization that measures team outcomes as well as individual ones makes it harder for narcissistic behavior to dominate. A promotion process that includes peer evaluations, not just supervisor ratings, filters differently. A culture that explicitly names and rewards psychological safety creates a different ethical climate than one that only rewards visible performance. None of this is naive idealism. It is precisely what the research on organizational culture suggests. The container shapes the behavior. Change the container. And if you are not currently in a position to change the container, if you are earlier in your career or in a role without structural influence, or simply trying to survive a difficult present, then the most important insight from this episode is perhaps this. The dysfunction you're experiencing is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is evidence of a system that has been architecturally shaped to produce exactly what you're experiencing. You didn't cause it. And navigating it skillfully is not the same as endorsing it. Here is the thesis of everything we've covered today, and I want to say it plainly. Dark triad personalities don't just exploit workplaces. They architect cultures of toxicity that persist long after they're gone, encoding dysfunction into organizational DNA through policies, promotion criteria, and ethical climates that outlive any individual. O'Boyle's meta-analysis of nearly 44,000 workers showed that dark traits predict both performance reduction and counterproductive behavior, and that culture either amplifies or constrains that damage. Chapman, O'Reilly, and Doerr showed that narcissistic leaders create lasting cultural harm that outlasts their own tenure. DeHoo and colleagues showed that Machiavellian leaders activate abusive behavior specifically when ethical constraints are weak, and that the downstream effects touch everyone in the system, not just direct targets. And Spurk's career data challenged the central myth. The dark triad leader is not a secret winner. They are someone consuming finite social capital at a rate that eventually catches up with them, while leaving a damaged system behind for everyone else to navigate. The shift this episode is asking you to make is from individual pathology to systemic diagnosis. Not, how do I protect myself from this person, though that matters, but what kind of container am I operating inside, and what is that container doing to my behavior? Because once you can see the architecture, you are no longer just inside it, you are looking at it. In the next episode, we go deeper into one specific mechanism: how dark triad personalities select their targets, not randomly, but with a precision that, once you understand it, you will never unsee. The patterns are consistent, the criteria are specific. And knowing them changes how you read every new professional relationship you enter. That is next.